Chicago winter pressed its thumb into the sky and left a smudge that would not wash off. The lake dragged long breaths over the breakwater, and the streets answered with salt and brake lights. I walked home carrying a paper bag from the corner store, milk and eggs and a bundle of parsley wrapped like a gift from a modest friend. The hallway leaned warm against my face when I opened the door. Caleb sat at the table with a laptop open and his shoulders squared in a pose. He saves for negotiations that happen with no witnesses. He lifted his eyes and dropped them again as if a thought had teeth. I hung my coat and set the bag on the counter. The apartment held the ordinary music of forced air and an old fridge that refuses to retire. The radiator ticked its slow metronome. My name on the mail by the sink sat on top and the font looked calmer than I felt. Caleb cleared his throat and said that Lena might stop by later. She needed to pick up a book she had left when the three of us met last week. He said she had had a rough day. He said it without specifics, the way people touch a sore tooth and pretend it is nothing. Lena and I have known each other since a freshman orientation line that misfiled us into the wrong building and then rewarded us for noticing. She's the kind of person who can borrow a room with her smile and return it looking better than she found it. Lately, that smile had gained a tremor. She had signed divorce papers in October, and the story she told about her ex changed depending on the hour. Caleb told me she was brave. I told him bravery is a word people throw at women who survived a situation others would rather gossip about than understand. He nodded and said nothing else. When Lena knocked that evening, the air behind her smelled like snow, and the hair she wears like a banner had been tucked into a wool hat. She moved around the room with practice and found the book on the coffee table and thanked me with the softness she saves for duress. She put a hand on Caleb's shoulder in what looked like gratitude that stayed too long. I told myself I was jealous for sport and that the hour needed heat more than it needed accuracy. She left with a wave, and the scent of cold stayed where she had stood, as if memory were a careful housekeeper. The next weeks sharpened into a habit of late messages and small favors. Caleb worked more nights, or said he did, and Lena asked for help carrying a box, or said she did. I did not keep a ledger then. I kept a calendar for students who still believe a due date is a kind of weather. The apartment wore the quiet of two people whose sentences have curled up against the wall for shelter. In the staff room at school, I graded essays about symbols that carry more weight than their bodies, and thought about the symbol of a wine glass left in our sink with a lipstick color I do not own. I thought about a hotel points email that arrived for Caleb for a date that matched a night he said he had slept at the office. I thought about the way Lena had used our bathroom one night and left a small bag of vitamins on the counter, as if the counter had asked to be responsible for something fragile. In January, Lena sent me a burst of joy through a text that forgot privacy. She wrote that she had news and that she finally felt lucky again. She asked if I could come with her to a clinic because she wanted a friend to be there when she saw proof of what luck looks like inside a body. I said I would, and the word felt like a small good deed handed to a stranger on a train. I asked for the time and address. She sent a screenshot that wore the clinic logo like a medal, and the time sat neatly under the date, 4 days from now. That night, Caleb said he had a client meeting out of town next week, an overnight, a chance to repair a relationship with a partner who had been sulking about budgets. He said the city would be dull without me. He did not meet my eyes while he packed his bag for the early flight. The clinic elevator smelled like antiseptic and optimism. Lena held my arm and we spoke about anything but the thing we were there to see. The nurse smiled with the patience of a woman who has learned how to hold two truths in both hands. A monitor flickered and a grainy curl made its first argument for existence. Lena cried softly. I held the back of her head like a coach holding a runner steady. The tech asked if she wanted a printout. Lena nodded and asked for 2. She folded one into her wallet and the other into the pocket of the coat she had tossed over my lap. The photo lay there like a new passport. On the bottom, in gray letters the color of rain, the date stamped itself without poetry. Later that afternoon, I sat in the teacher's lounge holding a paper cup and the printout that had slipped into my stack. I looked at the date again. I looked at a calendar. I looked at the plank of days around the ones Caleb had traveled. I looked at the time of day Lena had been in the clinic and the time of the flight Caleb had taken home. Math behaved like an honest witness. I did not accuse it of virtue. I let it recite. A small cold passed from my throat to my stomach and then settled in my hands. I placed the printout back in my bag and taught the last class of the day with a voice that had learned to stay steady in storms. People believe confrontation is a stage that begs for voices. I have learned that a plan is a stage that does not need volume. That night, I moved all conversations to text. I wrote to Caleb that my phone would be on silent during class hours and that I preferred written messages for logistics. He wrote back a wordless thumbs up that might as well have been a shrug. I wrote to Lena that I was proud of her for taking care of herself and asked if she needed anything in the next week. She wrote back that she would love ginger tea and crackers and that she felt safe with me. I read the sentence and felt an ache that wanted to steal my discipline. I told the ache to sit down and be quiet while adults speak. A week later, Lena posted a selfie to her story. The caption spoke about fresh air and staying hydrated and being grateful. Her face glowed with the kind of pride that does not know it is giving away more than it keeps. She wore a hoodie I had seen before, navy with a small stitched emblem near the cuff that looks like a bird under a hill. Caleb owns that hoodie. He has a habit of rolling the sleeves twice, which distorts the little bird into a shape like a flag in a crosswind. In the reflection of a window behind Lena, I could see the curl of that rolled cuff, and my hands learned a new level of cold. I saved the story with the kind of quiet that makes predators uneasy. At school, I ran into a colleague who once worked as an investigator before teaching English to teenagers who think a thesis statement is a conspiracy. She told me to keep everything and to keep my voice low. She told me that patterns confess when given room to perform. She told me that lies prefer noise. I thanked her and went home to cook rice and consider the sound of knives against cutting boards. When Caleb came in at 10, he smelled like the inside of a car that has held a whisper too long. He kissed my head with a choreography that my body stood still for, and my mind watched like a scientist watching a cloud that will not explain itself. February arrived with the kind of cold that brags. Lena asked me to come to her apartment to help organize a closet because she said she wanted to make room for change. The closet held boxes with the energy of a stage set where the prop master has asked too many favors. While she sorted scarves by color, I looked at a small stack of mail on the counter. A hospital billing envelope peered out like an uninvited guest. On top of the stack lay a receipt from a bar near the river dated 2 weeks ago at a time of night that made me think of last trains. The name on the card was Caleb. The tip was generous enough to call itself a confession. I put the receipt back and lined up the edges as if respect could be owed to paper that had helped me and hurt me at the same time. I checked our joint account and saw a hotel charge 2 days after the bar receipt. The company name matched a chain that Caleb uses on work trips. An internal email at his firm later spoke to him about a new policy reminder regarding expense compliance. The email reached me not because I was the intended recipient, but because he had once saved a draft on the wrong device, and cloud habits do not slouch. The policy reminder cited suspicious patterns and demanded documentation. I printed the email and did not allow my hands to shake. I rubbed the paper with my palm and reminded it that we had time. Lena sent me a late-night message, full of relief. She said the nausea had decided to be merciful that day. She asked if she could come by the next afternoon to borrow a scarf and sit on our couch. She said she felt less alone around our plants. I told her I would be home. Then I did a thing I had promised myself I would not do. I opened her social feed at 2 a.m. and scrolled back to October. Photos of a weekend that announced friends and future. A set at a hotel where the headboard looked familiar because I had once wiped ketchup from a similar piece of furniture when a nephew needed fries and art at the same hour. In a mirror selfie taken in a bathroom with good lighting, I saw the handle of a toiletry bag I had bought for Caleb 2 Christmases ago. The bag bears a scratch that looks like a comet. The scratch sat in the corner of the frame like a ticket stub for a show I had not been invited to. I closed the app and watched the ceiling treat me like someone it could comfort. Morning arrived with discipline and coffee. I took a photo of the receipt, the policy email, the hoodie reflection, the clinic printout date, the hotel charge, and I placed them in a folder with a name that did not shout: Timeline. My lawyer friend Sloan met me that week in a diner that forgives people at tables for the noise of their evidence. Sloan told me to sit up straight and keep this calm, and to write what I knew and what I suspected, like 2 separate weather reports. She told me to collect a clean list of assets and to split the account now, not later. She told me not to accuse. She told me to prepare. I opened a new account and moved my half. I downloaded 6 months of statements and circled items that did not belong to a marriage that respects daylight. I turned off shared locations on calendars and devices. I redirected my direct deposit to the new account and set up a budget that tasted like control without cruelty. I wrote out a list of bills and scheduled them in a pattern that kept me from acting like a sheriff or a saint. I copied files to a drive that does not touch the sky. I started sleeping again for 3 hours at a time. There are people who believe sleep is a luxury. Sleep is a tool that the body insists on when it is building a ladder out of a hole. When the first ultrasound with a heartbeat arrived, Lena texted me a photo without asking if I wanted to see it. The caption said, "Finally, a reason to wake up." The stamp at the bottom of the image sat in the same gray color. Weeks later, she posted a photo of a new water bottle and wrote a line about hydration for 2. The bottle wore a sticker that looked exactly like the corporate badge sticker from the firm where Caleb works, a little owl with a crooked eye handed out during a charity event months ago. I had the same sticker on a notebook in the kitchen. The odds were not high. The sticker anchored itself on the bottle like a tiny flag no one had planned to salute. In March, Caleb's mother called me to ask how I was sleeping. She likes to dress barbs as pastries and offer them with tea. She asked if I planned to try for a baby soon because time is a river that does not pause for our errands. I told her time also floods houses, and we had sandbags to consider. She did not laugh. She told me family matters end best when handled within family walls. I told her walls hold echoes, and some echoes do not belong to me. She sighed and said Caleb had been working hard and that men who work hard need comfort. I thanked her for the advice the way one thanks road construction for adding miles to a commute that would have saved you anyway. Sloan filed the first papers after I gave her the list and the folder. She said the case would walk and not run. She said that was good. She said truth walks because it does not need to prove it can sprint. She asked me to keep doing what I was already doing. I added one more thing. I wrote everything into a private record. Not just what happened, but when I felt my hands turn cold, when my voice steadied on its own, when I put a scarf into a bag and lied to my reflection by telling it the color looked good on me. Later that record would be less about court and more about remembering how I kept myself upright when the floor wanted to act clever. Spring drew a line under the snow, and the city sounded like a bag of marbles rolling under a door. Lena showed more and spoke less. People online told her she was glowing. They told her she deserved this. They told her to drink tea and read novels and ask for help. She liked the comments like a person stacking teacups that all look the same, but pretend they do not. At school, a student asked me what betrayal feels like. We were reading a story where characters never learn to be interesting. I told her betrayal feels like a cold that learns your address. I told her that it ends when you move without telling it where you are going. I confronted no one. I arranged the room. I had Sloan schedule a meeting at a neutral office with a view of a river that makes people pretend they are calm. She invited Caleb on the pretext of discussing taxes and a small adjustment to our budget due to rising rents, a subject that bores him enough to disarm him. He arrived with a tie that never belonged to his hands and a phone that kept lighting up with a rhythm my body already knew. Sloan began with a spreadsheet and a gentle voice. Midway, she set down a letter from HR at his company that referenced an ongoing expense review. He blinked and tried on 3 expressions before settling on a 4th that looked like a mask you could buy in a store. Sloan asked him whether any hotel charges had been assigned to personal accounts for reimbursement. He said he was not sure, and that this was not the place for that. Sloan said it was the perfect place for that because accounting will not move until it hears the truth from someone who can read dates. She asked if he remembered dinner at the River Bar 2 weeks before the late hotel check-in. He said he had entertained a client. Sloane smiled at me with her eyes, and I placed the bar receipt on the table. I pointed at the time. He stared at the numbers like a man looking into water and hoping to see a different reflection. Sloane did not press. She moved to the next page and spoke about financial preservation orders and the promise of a clean split if we keep steady. He nodded like a student who was told to behave in a library. I left the meeting and walked 2 extra stops before boarding the train because the air needed to make its case. If I had yelled, I might have felt briefly taller, then found myself shrunk by the echo. I was after height that could hold. On the train, I wrote a message to Lena that said I would like to bring her soup next week. She replied with a string of hearts. I replied with the day and time and the flavor. She wrote perfect, and the word read like a child who has practiced writing in a line for the first time and is proud enough to forget it is a lesson. Lena went to a prenatal class that week and posted a photo from the lobby. The glass wall behind her reflected the waiting area, and on a side table I could see a knitted cap I had dropped there 2 months prior while passing forms to a receptionist. The cap had a stain shaped like a comma near the edge, where a student had once hugged me after spilling cocoa in December. I know the shape of that stain because I had scrubbed it and it had insisted on staying in the room with me. The world likes to leave fingerprints on its own stories. I let it. The HR investigation at Caleb Job found a pattern of charges that failed to sit quietly in a ledger. They requested explanations and documentation, and then declined the explanations. He received a notice of suspension with pay while they completed a review. He came home the night he got the notice with a look that said he had lost an audience. He tried to talk to me about loyalty, and I tried to talk to him about heat for the apartment and the cost of groceries. He raised his voice, and I answered with the time of a future court date. He stopped performing. He sat down and stared at his hands like they had betrayed him by being made of skin. A month later, the class had a baby shower theme, and the photographs were all soft colors and promises. Lena posted 3 images. In one, she wore a dress the color of fog and smiled like a person who has finally convinced herself she's the center of a kind story. In another, she stood with friends who I do not know and held her belly as if it needed a bodyguard. In the third, she sat on a couch with a small pile of gift cards on her lap and a card on top with handwriting that was not mine, but looked like mine if my hand had been trying to imitate itself. The card said proud of you, and the P in proud had a split tail, the way Caleb sometimes writes his letters when he is trying too hard to be careful. Sloane prepared for a mediation session the way a chef sets a long table. She asked me for anything additional that might nudge a number from one side to another. I gave her a log of expenses and a timeline that would have made a careful historian smile. I gave her a printout of a clinic appointment calendar for Lena that I had photographed without fuss when I went to pick up soup containers from her kitchen. The calendar blocks overlapped suspiciously well with the dates Caleb had traveled. I noted them without commentary. Sloane told me the absence of adjectives was my best contribution. She told me that a judge can smell adjectives the way dogs smell fear. At the friend group dinner that same month, the group that still pretends to be young enough to stay until last call and then meets coffee as if it were a cure, Lena made an announcement. She said she was grateful for a new chapter. She said she felt supported. She left the father deliberately unmentioned and let the room supply fan fiction. A few faces turned to me with the compassion people give a person they have decided is harmless. I smiled like a person who has seen a test and knows which questions matter. I asked for the check. The waiter laughed and brought me a pen with a tape flag on it that said, "Honest." The night turned back into weather. I had stopped expecting apologies by then. I had begun to expect paper. I collected more small things than I thought necessary, because I have learned that the difference between a small thing and a keystone is not clear until after the bridge stands. A week before Lena due date, she asked if I could help with a hospital bag checklist. I said yes. I drove her to the clinic for a final check and watched her breathe a rhythm that had learned to ignore shame. Shame is an unskilled craftsman. It makes loud furniture that breaks under any real weight. Care makes chairs you can pass down a generation. The birth arrived in the slow early hours of a Tuesday, when the city had paused all arguments to hear each other again. I did not go to the hospital. I texted Lena a single line that said "safe delivery" and handed the rest of the night to a God who prefers to work quietly. The next afternoon, a photo appeared in the friend group chat. A baby asleep like a stone warmed by sun. A scrap of blanket in the frame with a pattern I recognized. Caleb's mother had once shown me the pattern as a boast of family tradition. It lay under the baby like a claim of land. My stomach made a sound like a gate resisting weather and then letting it pass through anyway. Sloan filed a motion for genetic testing attached to our divorce case. She phrased it with the kind of neutral air that would not offend a museum guard. Lena objected with a note about privacy and the dignity of new life. The judge wrote back with a sentence about clarity being a tool that protects children from future storms. The test took place under the fluorescent quiet of a clinic I had never seen from that angle. The nurse swabbed cheeks with the care of someone who has learned not to make promises beyond the reach of her hands. Caleb looked as if he wanted to leave the room, and also as if the floor would trap him if he tried. The result returned like an envelope from a school. Clean, brief, conclusive. Caleb father. Sloan added the result to our file and spoke to me about leverage. I thought of boats and ropes and how awkward and simple it can be to move large things. Caleb went from suspended to dismissed after HR closed its review, expense misuse, and false statements. He sent me a message full of wind and then a second message full of apology. I replied with the pickup time for a box of his books and a schedule for mediation. He sent me another paragraph about love being complicated. I sent him a photo of the box and the number of a mover. The friend group met again 2 weeks later at a place where the lights hang from cords like ideas that have survived committees. I arrived with a manila envelope that contained nothing new and everything necessary. The table was set for onion rings and opinions. I waited until someone asked how I was doing, and then I told them simple things. I said the divorce was proceeding. I said there would be no spectacle. I said facts had been placed in the right rooms. I said I wished Lena and the child's safety and enough sleep in a neighborhood with a park. I did not look at Caleb when I said park. I placed the envelope on the table and said that if anyone had questions about dates or logistics, they could read and then decide what tone they wished to use with me in the future. They read. The room moved from chatter to industry. The lines marched and the photos held. The hoodie turned a window into a witness. The clinic dates held hands with flight confirmations. The receipt smiled its tired strip smile. The company email wore its badge. The DNA result sat on top like a teacher that has called time. I did not feel vindicated. I felt tidy. Tidy is better than vindicated. Tidy holds through winter. Caleb tried to speak and found that words had decided to try freedom for once. Lena touched the corner of her mouth with a fingertip as if to check whether the smile she saves for second acts had permission to appear. I turned to the window and watched a bus gas itself forward and thought about the ordinariness of combustion. A friend who once called me dramatic stood up and hugged me without asking permission. I let her. It did not feel like pity. It felt like someone putting a hand on a door to make sure it stayed closed. We signed the agreement a month later. Sloan had built it out of numbers and habit and the physics of what a judge can stand behind without wincing. I kept the apartment. I kept my car. I kept my retirement account that I had been feeding for years with the faith of a gardener. He paid a settlement that did not call itself punishment. It called itself math. His resume began a pilgrimage toward a place where a man tells the truth about where he has been. I wished him an honest future the way a nurse wishes a patient patience with boring medicine that will save him if he lets it. I did not burn anything. I scrubbed. I donated the hoodie and 2 shirts that still smelled like a cologne that insists it is confident. I washed the curtains and the cupboards and the place on the floor where I had stood the night I realized math loves nobody and nothing except the truth. I opened the windows and let the city bring me its ordinary. Sirens that were not for me, a car alarm that behaved like a toddler, a couple arguing about whether a dog understands anything beyond snacks. I let the noise pass. What stayed was a quieter sound that felt like a cloth laid over a table before a meal that will not be rushed. The child grew in photographs that arrived on screens I could choose to look at or ignore. I chose a rule. I would look once a month and say a small prayer for the child with no name I was allowed to use, and then I would close the window. I would not spend my hours feeding a museum of other people's choices. I would spend them on the present tense, where floors demand mopping and students demand answers that have both grammar and mercy. My classroom became a place where I told truths about stories and let students find themselves in the margins. I taught a unit on consequence without using that word. The essays surprised me with their kindness. I rearranged my life without needing to announce it. I bought a rug that did not match anything and laughed when it made the room more honest. I took long walks along the river and practiced the discipline of looking up. The buildings carry a confidence I want to borrow. They hold the wind and do not complain. They take the sun and return it to the street like a tip well earned. On Sundays, I called my mother and listened to her describe recipes as if they were spells to keep a house upright. I let her believe she was teaching me something I did not know. Lena reached out once with a message about the past not being as simple as it looks from the outside. I wrote back that the past is a room with windows on all sides and that she could choose where to stand. I told her I would not be standing there with her. She wrote that she missed me. I wrote that the word miss is better used for trains. She sent a photo of the baby gripping a finger. I did not answer. I printed the photo and put it in a box with a note that said, "May truth find you sooner than it found your parents." The box went on a high shelf where dust has a chance to practice patience. The divorce decree arrived by mail and felt like a stern teacher who still believes in your future. Sloan texted me a line that said, "Go eat something fun." I walked to a place that serves bread with confidence and ordered soup and a glass of wine that tastes like good decisions. I ate slowly and watched people invent reasons to be out late on a Wednesday. A couple at the next table argued about a podcast as if it held their mortgage. The server asked if I wanted dessert, and I said not tonight. I tipped like someone who knows how much work costs. Summer reached up and tilted the light, and the city changed its voice. I took a trip for 3 days to a lake I had never asked for and found that water knows how to talk to grief without raising its voice. I sat with my feet in the shallows and let fish write poetry in circles around my ankles. I walked back to the cabin and slept like a person who had paid her bill. When I returned home, the apartment smelled like the faint sweetness of a place that has decided to forgive you for making it wait. I kept the plan of living small and sturdy. I replaced the light over the sink and felt a thrill that did not need anyone else's applause. I oiled the hinge on the closet door and smiled when it agreed to be civil. I taught my students to quote with honesty and to paraphrase without theft. I walked past the bar by the river and watched the way the chairs stand with a patience that does not need inspiration. I almost waved to them. They have seen so much, and still they stand. A year passed. The child grew into a face that could look out of any frame and demand love. I heard from mutual friends that she sleeps well and laughs like a bird learning to read. I prayed that for her and meant it. Caleb found a job that asked him to show up on time and count money that belongs to other people. That kind of job teaches humility illegally fast. He pays what the court told him to pay, and he texts me once a season to ask how I am. I answer with a weather report and a request that he be punctual for the next meeting with the mediator to review a small clause that still needed polish. He answers with "Yes, Mom," and a silent apology that I do not unwrap. I started seeing a therapist who does not perform magic tricks. She asked me to tell the story in verbs. She asked me to tell the body where it held things. She asked me to build a list of promises I will keep to myself when the next storm forgets that houses have rules. I write the promises in a notebook that smells like cardboard and glue. I read them out loud while the kettle gathers itself. The promises feel like stones that remember where they belong in the wall. In the fall, I ran into Lena by accident at a market where apples sit in piles like credible witnesses. She stood by a display of flowers, and the child slept in a stroller with a pacifier, the same shade as the sky the day before rain. Lena looked thin in the theatrical way people look when they want to be assumed brave. She told me I looked well. I told her I remember names better when I am rested. She told me she hoped we could be friends again someday. I told her to take care of herself and the child. She nodded and stared at the flowers, as if they might give her permission to become kinder. I bought pears and walked home without looking back. There are days when regret taps on the window and asks to be let in. I ignore it the way one ignores a seagull who has learned to beg. Regret is greedy and travels in packs. I give it nothing. I feed patience instead. Patience eats slowly and does not make a mess. On those days, I clean the desk and put pens in a line and do one kind thing for a stranger. The kind thing is not for them. It is for the part of me that refuses to become the loudest thing in the room. One winter evening, I met Sloane for coffee, and she asked me how I would summarize the whole story if I had one sentence. I told her I chose repair over spectacle. She raised her cup to that and then told me a new client had walked in last week with a printout of a timeline that reminded her of mine. She said the client had watched me from the back of a courtroom once and taken notes on how not to turn her life into a show. I smiled and told Sloane to charge her a little less for the first hour. Sloane laughed and said she would charge her fairly, and that fairness is mercy when done right. I do not keep all the evidence anymore. I keep the lessons that can be taught to children in a classroom without dragging ghosts in by accident. Tell the truth early. Learn the numbers. Save your work. Do your future self a favor and leave her maps. Ask for help before you decide you do not deserve it. Teach your hands to do small repairs so your heart can rest. These are not love songs. They are recipes for staying. At night, I read before bed. Sometimes a novel where people learn to be complicated without needing to die by the last page. Sometimes essays that hold the world up to the light and describe the smudges precisely. Sometimes nothing but the ceiling speaking in the voice radiators use when they want to be decent. I sleep and dream of a house with many rooms, some of which I will never enter, and I wake feeling grateful that a life can be larger than a single narrative if you give it more doors. If I walk by the river and see a hoodie with a small, stitched bird on someone else's shoulders, I let it pass. Clothes are not guilty. People are not condemned by fabric. People are measured by how they carry what they have done once the lights come back on. I have carried mine into daylight. I have let it be counted. I have sent it on its way when it tried to turn back. Spring again. The smell of thawed soil makes the city sound like it has a new band. I open windows and rearrange the shelf where I keep the books that deserved me when I did not deserve them. The phone stays quiet unless I ask it to sing. I pay bills and the numbers line up without panic. I walk to school and my feet recognize the cracks they prefer to avoid. A student hands me a poem she wrote in the margin of a math worksheet, and it knocks gently on a door behind my ribs and opens it. I do not know what Lena tells the child at bedtime. I hope she tells a truth that does not make the world smaller. I hope she tells a story where mistakes are treated like potholes that can be filled rather than cliffs that end the road. I hope she has learned to stop collecting sympathy like trophies and instead start collecting receipts for good work. I hope the child does not learn to mimic the worst talents of adults. I am not in charge of that house. I am in charge of mine. Caleb sends a message at the start of the next school year. He says he has joined a support group. He says he is sorry and then does not ask for anything. I answer with a message wishing him honest days and a life that does not need to borrow trouble to feel interesting. He replies with thanks. It sounds like a word that finally remembered its job. I file the message in a folder named after the month and forget to look at it again. People ask if I would date now. I tell them I am dating responsibilities and we are happy together. The joke works because it is not a joke. I take myself to the movies and sit in the 5th row where you can hear the projector hum like an old friend. I eat popcorn like a citizen. I hold the hand of the seat next to me and thank it for staying empty without complaining. On the walk home, the city gives me a show for free. Streetlights confess. Bicycles practice their grammar, dogs make case law. I write none of it down, and it still counts. The best revenge anyone could imagine for me would be a life that refuses to live in reaction to what hurt it. I am not auditioning for that role. I have it. I wake and choose the next useful thing. I teach. I make soup. I take out the trash. I buy stamps. I return library books before they become fines. I trim the plant that forgave me for forgetting it one weekend. I write my name on a postcard and send it to my own door to remind myself the mail still knows where I live. There is a boy in my third period who believes words can fix everything. I tell him words can fix many things, but they need help from action. He writes that down. He will learn the rest the way we all do, in hallways and on buses and under streetlights that sometimes lie. I want him to learn gently. I want him to be a person who reaches for a broom before he reaches for a megaphone. I want him to remember that truth is not a weapon. It is a beam. It holds up the roof. On nights when the city hums too loud, I stand by the window and count the time between sirens. I imagine each siren as a sentence with a period at the end. They go by and the world returns to its slower grammar. I lean my head against the glass and let the cool correct me. I step back and the room settles. It is not a temple. It is a room with a table and a lamp and a plant that needs water in the morning. It is enough. The friend group split like a river meets a stubborn rock. Some people went with Lena. Some people stayed with their own discomfort. A few stayed with me. I do not score them. I keep the ones who show up at move time and sneeze at dust because that is the only test that has ever mattered. Last week, one of them brought a casserole and called it a truce oath. We ate it and signed the oath with forks. I keep one photo on the fridge now. It shows my hands tying a ribbon around a stack of essays. The ribbon is red and immodest. The essays are full of attempts. Attempts are my favorite genre. A life is a long attempt. I leave the photo there as a reminder that a day can be beautiful without needing to prove anything. I will keep building this quiet like a mason who learned from old walls. Each brick is a decision that does not shout. I will choose the grocery aisle with better light and the bus that arrives early so I can stand and let the lake wind write its lesson on my face. I will send notes to the people who stayed and tell them they built a bridge without asking for a nameplate. I will mark the calendar with small feasts, such as the day a faucet finally stops complaining, or the day a student revised a sentence until it felt true. I will practice leaving rooms kinder than I found them and treat quiet as a craft that improves with hours.